So we're working with limited empirical evidence on nearly any single thing that we do. This is all cutting edge stuff. And on the cutting edge,
you have 9 years track record for how we grew Bitcoin from nothing to where it is today.
So you're cherry picking two things. First, you're cherry picking that fees are the reason other cryptos did well, basically like robbing those cryptos of any other mimetic advantage or technical advantage or marketing team advantage. You're just saying Bitcoin had high fees, and that's the only reason these other cryptos became valuable. If you talk to
be fair, I think if I can add what exactly my argument is, the fees are a side effect. What I think really caused the other cryptocurrencies to take off was when Bitcoin blocks became full, you no longer had certainty that your transaction was going to be confirmed. And the uncertainty of when your transaction is going to go through is an even bigger problem than the high fees. So I think, I get to see support tickets from lots of different businesses.
I wouldn't be surprised if you pumped the value of those coins. I mean, you
what coins?
Zcash be brought into the world, a 20% pre-mined, impossible to detect inflation altcoin. You funded that, right? So to some degree,
yeah. And I can tell you the reason for that though, is everyone's busy arguing over Bitcoin scalability and how to scale Bitcoin at the moment. But the big giant other problem that's looming for Bitcoin is fungibility. Bitcoin is not nearly as fungible as it needs to be. And fungibility is just another, friendlier sounding name for anonymity, right? The more private Bitcoin is, the better the money it is. And that's another area that's really, really lacking with Bitcoin. And small blocks make that problem worse. When governments or whoever are trying to search for transactions, they're looking for a needle in a haystack. We want them to be looking in a great big giant haystack rather than a little tiny 1 megabyte haystack. So
they can't.
That's another problem that's caused by small blocks.
I agree with that. And if it wasn't 20% pre-mined, and if it had detectable inflation that you could detect if the coin broke, I would have been happy to fund it too. But those two things are deal breaker for me. Anyway,
okay.
So my point is,
nice part about okay, go ahead.
Yeah. So my point is, a lot of rich crypto guys are the reason that those things had a spike to make them interesting, to give other people in the normal public a reason to find them more interesting. Look, we both agree we want lower fees. So let's just talk about fees, right?
Okay, because the core team disagrees with both of us on that, then if you're saying you want
for a very specific reason. So I said that you cherry picked the reason that we lost market share. Now I'm going to say that your
the reason is?
Well, right now, all those other things don't perform any commerce functions. So if it was really a replacement good, as you advertise, then it would be used as a replacement. But Bitcoin shares no utility replacement value with the pump and dump ICOs. There is no retail adoption. There are no retail wallets. These people don't even take the coins off exchange. I think
you're conflating ICOs with other competing cryptos, and I'll give you an example from my own life. So there's a website called bitcart.io that I used to love to buy Amazon gift cards from with Bitcoin. You would get a 15% discount for Amazon gift cards using Bitcoin. And as of, I don't know, maybe a month or two ago, when the network became really, really full, they stopped accepting Bitcoin. And they only were accepting, I believe, Dash and Ethereum. And so that's a real world use case of businesses shifting away from Bitcoin to competing altcoins, which I think are different than ICOs.
Right. You're 100% right. The increase in fees prices Bitcoin out of a lot of markets. And even though you're 100% right, the amount of dollars and liquidity and pump that comes from actual retail darknet market usage, and you, the number one Bitcoin user in the world's usage, is like 3 to 5% of the total market cap. So you're right. Anyone that actually does do Bitcoin commerce, which is almost nobody, might have to switch to currencies.
I really disagree that there's not many people using Bitcoin for commerce, and anybody can take a look at just how many people are using Bitcoin for commerce by going over to blockchain.info and watch the transactions scrolling by. Those are real people using Bitcoin to move real amounts of money around the world. And we don't necessarily know what they're using it for, but if you see it moving, there's some sort of economic activity going on behind it. At $5 a transaction or $8 a transaction, they're not moving it just for fun. They're doing it because they're performing some sort of economic activity with it.
If you wanted to buy a car with Bitcoin, there was one company in the States that had scale. They went out of business. There's maybe one or two small shops, like near Butterfly Labs in Kansas City. There was a shop that accepted Bitcoin. There's maybe one in California, maybe one in Florida. I love Bitcoin as much as the next guy, but I'm not willing to pretend that it's not 1,000 times less places you can spend it. And I'm being generous with 1,000. It's probably 100,000.
I think you're really missing the picture. There's more than 200,000 merchants in Japan that accept Bitcoin. I can walk down the street to the electronics store and use Bitcoin in the store. I can walk down to the street to the equivalent of like Macy's or something in the US and spend Bitcoin here in Japan. There's all sorts of restaurants. There's all sorts of stuff. There's all sorts of websites. I book more hotels on Expedia in Bitcoin, than I can count each year. There's a huge amount of commerce that's being used with the Bitcoin network. And the fact that it costs $8 per transaction to do it, and yet the blocks are still completely full, shows just how big of a demand there is for people to use Bitcoin in real world commerce.
All right. So you think there's a lot of commerce. Maybe in Japan there is. I don't think there's a lot. We'll move on.
Do you have a theory as to why people would be moving the Bitcoins at $8 per transaction if they're not doing commerce with it? Why are they spending $8 every time they move Bitcoin, and because all the blocks are completely full? What are they doing if it's not commerce?
Well, yeah, I don't know. That's the whole idea, is we're not supposed to know.
Commerce. People are using Bitcoin to pay people all over the world. And when the network became full and the user experience became not as good as it used to be with Bitcoin, people started exploring alternatives like Dash and Monero and Ethereum and things like that.
Yeah,
and that's a direct result of
there's other alternatives too, like Visa and MasterCard and Swift.
Yeah. And people are using that sometimes now instead of Bitcoin, whereas previously they would have used Bitcoin.
Yeah, so
it's a real problem
we agree we'd both like to see Bitcoin fees be very low and that everyone accept it and use it. We're both on the same point there, right?
So the Blockstream team want the exact opposite. They openly say they want Bitcoin fees to be high. They want Bitcoin transactions to be easy to double spend. And they want the blocks to be full all the time, which leads to uncertainty as to when a transaction is going to be confirmed on the network. So you and I want the same thing. Yep. Those guys want the exact opposite. Why would you be supporting their roadmap for the future of Bitcoin?
Because they're not a monolith, and there's interior conflict amongst their ranks. Let me give you an example.
Please.
Greg Maxwell, he's all right with the 1 megabyte limit. Luke Jr., he's not. He says we only get 17% more processing per year, but the blockchain grows faster than that. So he wants to knock it down to 300. No one else on the team agrees with that, right? So Luke Jr. is on his own, with tonal numbering and his 300 kilobyte limit.
Geocentric Earth theory, and he's on his own with a lot of things.
He's on his own with a lot of stuff, right? So the majority of developers do not agree with him on I won't say majority, but his most public controversial opinions, all right? Now,
but I do think that for the most part, there's consensus among the block streaming core developers that they want to have a fee market right now that creates high fees.
Well, I can explain it to you. I'm going to. I've prepared for this.
Okay,
so
I'm ready.
You are correct that you could have lower fees with larger blocks now. You would get more of the same problem, which when you cherry picked, you missed out on, which was the centralization,
what problem is
which is causing empty blocks. The centralization is the result of the block sizes being what they are. The bigger they get, the more empty blocks get mined, and the more centralization exists.
So the empty blocks are actually just a way of the network slowing down so that everybody can keep up. So the reason an empty block takes place is one pool finds a block, and then the other pools that are spy mining on it, they see the header, and they can start mining on the header right away until they have received the entire block and they validated that block. Then they can toss a bunch more transactions in there and mine a block that has a bunch of transactions. So the fact that one full block is found here, and then 2 seconds later, while spy mining, another empty block is found. The full block takes 5-10 seconds to validate. The empty block with